Welcome to GRE. I'm your host, Keith Weinhold, talking about how I personally built and grew wealth myself with real numbers and real properties, what a rent freeze actually means to you, and how you could be losing income by not creatively generating more rent from properties that you already own. I'll talk about exactly how today on Get Rich Education.
Since 2014, the powerful Get Rich Education podcast has created more passive income for people than nearly any other show in the world. This show teaches you how to earn strong returns from passive real estate investing in the best markets without losing your time being a flipper or landlord. Show host Keith Weinhold writes for both Forbes and Rich Dad Advisors and delivers a new show every week. Since 2014, there's been millions of listener downloads in 188 world nations. He has A-list show guests include top-selling personal finance author Robert Kiyosaki. Get Rich Education can be heard on every podcast platform, plus it has its own dedicated Apple and Android listener phone apps. Build wealth on the go with the Get Rich Education podcast. Sign up now for the Get Rich Education podcast or visit GetRichEducation.com.
You're listening to the show that has created more financial freedom than nearly any show in the world. This is Get Rich Education.
Welcome to GRE, from Stonehenge, England to Stone Mountain, Georgia, and across 188 nations worldwide. I'm Keith Weinhold, and you're listening to Get Rich Education. I visited Stonehenge in May, by the way. Today I'm back for another incomprehensibly slack-jawed performance here. Still a shaved mammal too. Status hasn't changed, and remain profligate and unrepentant about the whole thing. You probably know it by now that if you're listening here and you want to learn and do things the same way that everyone else does things, then you are squarely in the wrong place. I really mean it. More on that later. But you know, Wall Street doesn't scorn real estate because it's risky. They dislike it because it doesn't scale the way that they need it to. Private real estate can get messy, operational, illiquid. Every real estate deal is different. Every market has its own physics. You can't package it into a fund with a push-button deploy strategy. And that's precisely the point. The modern financial system rewards frictionless products that trade constantly and generate fees. Instead, building real durable wealth has never been frictionless. Here's what the wealth distribution actually shows. For the median American, 63% of net worth is in home equity and retirement accounts. For the top 10%, that tier, 25% is in real estate and private business ownership. But for the top 1%, that highest tier, 45% combined is in private business equity and real estate. So as you approach the top 1%, it's more skewed toward owning a business and directly owning real estate. Wall Street, they only offer derivative exposure to real estate through mega funds and REITs, but exposure isn't ownership. Your best risk-adjusted returns live in the deals that are too small and too messy for institutions to touch, and that's where your yield lives, the control, the opportunity. The world's enduring fortunes weren't built just by buying exposure. They were built by owning things, land, companies, assets that require some sweat to get them going. The next decade favors owners over allocators, the stuff that pays you perpetual dividends. So the irony is that the very things Wall Street avoids, the messy hands-on part of real estate, that's what makes it such a powerful wealth builder. And see, even as we somewhat found out last week when we talked about AI property management here on the show, you can't fully automate relationships or construction or management, but that friction is exactly where the margin lives. What makes real estate frustrating for institutions is exactly what makes it valuable for operators and long-term owners like you and I. It's the nuance, the inefficiency, and the need to actually know something about a market rather than just model it. Wealth that lasts comes from assets that you can influence, not just monitor. And that is the difference between you having mere exposure and true ownership. You can't outsource legacy. The messy path of ownership is often where meaning in real freedom is found. You've got to tend to the garden somewhat, whether your properties are professionally managed or self-managed. But some people get overwhelmed if they're asked for a login and a password, even. We all know that feeling somewhat. Well, then they stay metaphorically logged out of success. Think about how easy remotely managing your real estate portfolio is today. Sheesh, 200 years ago, there was no anesthesia. We had smallpox, brutal physical labor, no electricity. Today, what if a website tells you that you've got to reset your password? Oh my gosh, is the deal off then? Just overwhelming. Can you imagine the effort? Now, 2 weeks ago, I mentioned to you that I went back and visited the first piece of real estate that I ever owned, that seminal blue fourplex. But did I ever tell you how I grew that seed into a massive real estate portfolio and how you can do it by following GRE principles? Let me take you through the early steps here so you can see how you can get something similar going. Of course, your path will look different, but this is going to spawn a lot of ideas for you, I think. You already know about my $10K to $11K down payment into that first ever fourplex as the FHA 3.5% down, owner occupied. But I didn't buy another piece of real estate for over 3 years because real estate just was not that driving thing in my life yet. So I lived in one of those really modest fourplex units longer than I had to, 3+ years. After that, I moved out to a pretty modest still single-family home 5 miles away that I had just bought. And since I vacated one of the fourplex units in order to do that, now I had 4 rent incomes instead of 3. But here is really the pivot point with what happened next. Now, what would most people do? They might hold on to that fourplex, keep self-managing it, and when they could, perhaps aggressively make principal payments, getting the building paid off before its organic 30-year amortization period. And then what else would they do once it was paid off? Say that would take them 12 years, which would entail a lot of sacrifice, like working overtime at their job and skipping vacations. Oh, they'd think something like, oh, now the cash flow is really going to pour in with this paid off fourplex. Yeah, it sure would increase a lot. But after 12 years of toil and sacrifice, cash flow off of one fourplex still wouldn't even let you quit your job. Staying small doesn't work. Plus, you lived below your means for a really long time. That is sweat and time that you're never going to relinquish. You started working for money rather than letting other people's money take over and work for you. It is right there waiting to do that for you. So instead of that path, what I did is when equity ran up in that first fourplex building, its value increased from $295 to $425 in 3.25 years. I did exactly the opposite. I borrowed the maximum out of that first fourplex building, 90% CLTV, and used those tax-free funds, tax-free funds when you do that, to both spend money well on vacations and make a 10% down payment on a second fourplex building that costs $530K. Now I'm still living in the single-family home while I've got the 2 fourplex buildings, both with 90% loans on them, still cash flowing a little. So 8 rent incomes, more debt than I ever had, 10-to-1 leverage on 2 fourplexes, and this was all less than 5 years from the time that I bought the first fourplex. And yes, it probably took some password resets in there. Then, next I learned that investing in only one metro, which is what I had done to that point, that's actually pretty risky because all 8 of my rent incomes, plus my own primary residence, are exposed to the whims, fortunes, and misfortunes of only one economy. This was in 2012 now. So I started buying turnkey single-family rentals in other economies that make sense. Investor advantage places is what you've got to look for. Florida, Texas, Ohio, Alabama, Tennessee. My first turnkey was bought in the Dallas-Fort Worth metro. I know I told you that before. All right, but how was I buying more even though I was still working a day job in a cubicle for the DOT? Well, it wasn't from my job, because that job is working for money. What it was is borrow tax-free and grow, borrow tax-free and grow, borrow tax-free and grow. By then, enough equity had accumulated in the first two fourplexes that I traded one for an 8-plex and the other for an 11-plex. Now we're getting up to $3,500 of monthly cash flow at this point, which is probably $5,000 plus per month in inflation-adjusted terms, and the 8-plex cost $760,000, and the 11-plex cost $850,000 back then. And I still remember that. That was a big day for me back then. Those buildings closed on either the same day or on consecutive days. I forget. Well, that was $1.6 million in purchases. Maybe that's $2 to $2.5 million in today's dollars. And see, that is sure more than what one paid-off fourplex would have given me on that old slow track. Yet I had all of this faster than waiting 12 years to aggressively pay off one fourplex. And, some could say back at that time, they would look at that situation from the outside and say, Keith, where did you get the money to make 20% down payments on that $1.6 million worth of real estate? That is $320,000 cash. Did you save up all the money? No, I didn't. I didn't have the ability to save that much money at my job. Did you use your existing properties like ATMs, raiding one property to buy another? Yeah, that's exactly what I did. That is the use of other people's money. That is wiser than spending my time away from loved ones by selling my time for dollars that I'm never going to get back. And by the way, I have always been the sole owner of properties, no partners here. Now, at this point, I've got dozens of rental units spread across multiple states, all professionally managed. And by the way, 8 doors is the most that I've ever self-managed, because I got professional management involved after that. Oh, there are a ton of lessons in there about what I just told you, many of them which I've sprinkled through more than 500 episodes now. But now that I told you where I came from, do you know the lesson that I want to leave you with here on this one? For the most part, it's that I'm not even using my own money to do this. Now, I did add some of my own money for down payments, sure, by far the minority portion. Primarily and centrally, I keep leveraging the bank's money, and they make the down payment for me on the next property. Borrow tax-free and grow, borrow tax-free and grow, borrow tax-free and grow. Yes, the pace of you doing this is going to fluctuate over time, but that is the playbook that I just gave you right there. Now, I've done it in cycles that feel slower because appreciation is lower, but interest rates tend to be lower during those times. And I keep doing it in cycles that move faster because appreciation is higher and interest rates tend to be higher during those times. I've done it when lending was loose, like pre-Dodd-Frank, and I've done it when lending was tight. And inflationary times supercharge this whole thing. Sooner than later, you would rather get $5 million worth of real estate out there under your belt, all floating up with inflation and appreciation, not just $1 million worth. $1 million worth, that's more like sticking with one fourplex and trying to pay it off. Anything worth doing, anything in your life is worth doing well. Look, other people's money is still available to me and to you. So using my own money back when I was an employee, that's exactly when I would have had to trade more of my finite time for dollars. And see, that's what the masses do, and that's precisely what keeps them as the mediocre masses. I really mean it. Now, I wanted to make things real for you with that soliloquy. Later today, I'll discuss the GRE principles that formative story spawned. A few weeks ago, it made substantial news inside and outside the real estate world that Zoran Mamdani was elected to be the next New York City mayor. His first day on the job will be the first of the coming year, and actually it's easy for you to remember how New York City mayoral terms work because it is the same as the President of the United States. Each term lasts 4 years, and they can serve up to 2 consecutive terms, 8 years. Let's, you and I, listen into the audio from this short video clip together. This Mamdani campaign spot ran back before Election Day, but it tells you what he stands for and where he's coming from with regard to rent. In a slightly corny way, the ad shows various tenants popping their heads out of apartment windows and such, saying like, "Hey, wait, what? You're going to freeze my rent?"
I'm Assemblyman Zohran Mamdani, and I'm running for mayor to freeze the rent for every rent-stabilized tenant.
Wait, you're gonna freeze my rent?
Yes.
Did I hear rent freeze?
Yes! This guy's gonna freeze the rent.
No hike?
None.
This guy's gonna freeze the rent.
It's true. As your next mayor, I will freeze your rent.
Paid for by Zoran for NYC.
The banner at the end of the ad reads, "Zoran for an affordable New York City." Oh yeah, slogans like that are so catchy for anything. All right, he says he's going to freeze the rent for every rent-stabilized tenant. And rent control and rent stabilization, they mean very similar things. Ceilings on the rent. I'm soon going to tell you what I think about that, and I've got more on Mamdani shortly, but it's not going to be political. This is not that kind of show. This is an investing show. I think that even our foreign listeners know how big and influential New York City is. It's not the political capital, but it is the capital of so many things in the United States. It's America's largest city by far. 8.5 million just in the city proper, 20 million in the metro. And New York's growing in sheer number of people. The metro gained more population than any other city, almost 250,000 people added just last year. Even if you doubled the population of the second largest city, LA, New York City would still be larger. All right, well, how did we get here? A quick story of New York City rent control is that in 1918, New York City passed its first flavor of rent control, and that was the first U.S. city to do so. That didn't solve the problem. So in 1943, Congress passed the Emergency Price Control Act, and its name implied a temporary patch during World War II. But even after it expired, and even after the war ended, New York State chose to make it basically permanent in 1950. That didn't solve the problem. So in 1962, New York State passed a law allowing cities to enact expanded rent control if they declared a, quote, housing emergency. Well, New York City did, and that housing emergency has essentially continued unresolved. Still, what they consider an emergency condition persists today. Yeah, all these decades later. I mean, really, a, 60 to 70 year long emergency condition? That didn't solve the problem. So in 1969, New York City passed what they called rent stabilization. It's really just a new flavor of rent control, and this greatly expanded the number of properties that were subject to these rent regulations. And about half of New York City's apartments are subject to that law. That didn't solve the problem. So more expansion and more tweaks of regulating the rent were made in the decades that followed. You had notable ones in 1997, 2003, 2011, and 2015, but none of them solved the problem. So in 2019, New York expanded rent stabilization to include what they call vacancy control. Now, what that means is rent caps are now applied to new renters, not just those existing tenants renewing a lease. And it also granted more tenant protections. That didn't solve the problem. So in 2024, New York State passed what they call good cause eviction. That is a third expansion of rent regulation and these tenant protections. This time they just gave it a slick name. kind of apropos of Madison Avenue's famed marketing prowess, I suppose. That didn't solve the problem. And by the way, rent caps came in below not only the rate of inflation, but also below household income growth almost every year over the last decade. And in some years, no increase was allowed at all. That is a rent freeze, but that didn't work either. And meanwhile, New York's public housing agency has $80 billion in deferred maintenance needs, and it's running a $200 million plus operating deficit. So government-run housing, that hasn't worked either. All right, well, that brings us to 2025, where New York City is electing a mayor who campaigned on freezing the rents and expanding public housing. So New York City now has, for over a century, chosen to expand and rebrand these ideas that just haven't worked, and yet they keep coming back for more. And what exactly is the word for doubling and tripling and quadrupling down on ideas that have proven not to work? Is that word stupidity? So throughout that history that I just brought you from 1918, whenever I say that didn't work, what do I mean by that? And here's the big takeaway for you. What I mean is that rent control hasn't worked in New York City because it discourages landlords from maintaining rental housing and certainly from building new rental housing. So what that does is that it shrinks the supply over time. When demand exceeds supply, you know what happens to price. And in Manhattan, just the studio apartment now averages $4,150. And the average rent citywide, that's Manhattan, Brooklyn, Queens, the Bronx, and Staten Island, which does include some rough areas in this average rent, is $3,560. So as a result, what really happens here is that rent control helps a few lucky tenants while driving up rents and then worsening the shortages for everyone else. So what is the solution here? It is simple. Actually, do less. I mean, isn't it great when you can solve a problem in your life by actually doing less? Yeah, drop the regulations against building and drop all forms of rent control. That way we'll have more building, and with higher supply, natural price discovery could take place. So he says he's going to freeze the rent for every rent-stabilized tenant. And you can start to understand why we don't discuss investing in New York City housing very much on GRE. When we do, we talk about it as a model of what not to do. The good news is that I don't have any evidence of rent control spreading into the investor advantage areas that we talk about here, like the Southeast and the South Central part of the United States and the Midwest. But here's the thing. Just ask yourself this question. What if there was a force imposed on you by popular vote that froze your income? Okay, I'm talking about no matter what you do from work, you're a software engineer, a doctor, a nurse, a paralegal, a carpenter. Would you think that was really unjust if your profession were singled out and then voters said, hey, no more raises for you? We don't care if there's inflation. We don't care if you're getting better at your job. We don't care if you have rising expenses. We're going to put a cap on your income. How would you like that? Well, look, in New York City, they're voting for landlords' income to be frozen. They are singling out one profession, and these are really important people. These are the housing providers. So, by the way, I've heard two people describe New York City Mayor-elect Zohran Mamdani as a good-looking man. Is he good-looking? I had to go look again when people said this. I guess he's not bad-looking. And hey, despite being a heterosexual male, I can say that some guys are good-looking. I just never thought that with him. Now, do you have one friend, kind of have that type of friend who always just seems to know what's happening in the housing market? Well, that person could be you. There is a way to do that. Boom, it's easy, and you're going to sound smart without reading a single boring Fed report. I don't sell courses. I don't wear sunglasses indoors, and I definitely don't tell you to flip houses on TikTok. I just talk here, and I send you a smart, short real estate newsletter. That's it. This is smart stuff that you can brag about at boring dinner parties, and you've got a lot of those coming up here at the holidays. It is free. I write our letter myself, and I'd love to have you as a reader sign up at greletter.com. It's quick and easy. Your future wealth will thank you for it. See what I did there? It takes less than 3 minutes to read, and it is super informative. greletter.com. Again, that's greletter.com. I've got more straight ahead. You know, most people think they're playing it safe with their liquid money, but they're actually losing. Savings accounts and bonds don't keep up when true inflation eats 6 or 7% of your wealth every single year. I invest my liquidity with FFI, Freedom Family Investments, in their flagship program. Why? Fixed 10 to 12% returns have been predictable and paid quarterly. There's real-world security backed by needs-based real estate like affordable housing, senior living, and healthcare. Ask about the Freedom Flagship Program when you speak to a Freedom coach there. And that's just one part of their family of products. They've got workshops, webinars, and seminars designed to educate you before you invest. Start with as little as $25K and finally get your money working as hard as you do. Get started at freedomfamilyinvestments.com/GRE or send a text now. It's 1-937-795-8989. Yep, text their Freedom Coach directly. Again, 1-937-795-8989. The same place where I get my own mortgage loans is where you can get yours, Ridge Lending Group, NMLS 42056. They provided our listeners with more loans than anyone because they specialize in income properties. They help you build a long-term plan for growing your real estate empire with leverage. Start your pre-qual and even chat with President Chaley Ridge personally. While it's on your mind, start at ridgelendinggroup.com. That's ridgelendinggroup.com.
This is Freedom Family Investments co-founder Danny Lynn Robinson. Listen to Get Rich Education with Keith Weinhold and don't quit your daydream.
Welcome back to Get Rich Education. I'm your host, Keith Weinhold. Earlier this year, I talked to you about new ways where you can generate more income from the properties that you already own, and doing that through peer-to-peer leasing platforms. I got feedback from you that you loved it when I talked about it on that episode. Well, I've got more of them to tell you about today. This is exciting. Is there money sitting right under your nose and you haven't even collected it yet? And sometimes this happens in the world. This has nothing to do with finding Uranus, but it is similar to how they just discovered a new moon of Uranus, even though it's only 6 miles wide. Yes, that's something that scientists recently discovered. Yes, much like this new small moon of Uranus that was really always there, but just discovered. Metaphorically, this is what we're talking about with your real estate here. Now, this is a lot like how Airbnb rattled the hotel world about 15 years ago. These platforms let you rent out space and amenities that you already own but barely use. Neighbor.com is the first one. I'm not going to say .com every time because most of them are that way, and they've got a mobile app of the same name. All right, Neighbor, that's like Airbnb for your garage or your basement or even that creepy crawl space that you never go into. So instead of letting junk collect dust, you rent out your unused space to people who need that storage, meaning then that their clutter pays your mortgage. So customers request space and then you approve it. That's how it works. In fact, we have a woman here on staff at Get Rich Education that easily made about $1,000 personally on Neighbor. She rented out a parking space in her driveway. She rented that space to a college student that needed a place to park her car while she went back home for the summer, you can easily do that too. Then there's Swimply, Swimply. Rent out your pool by the hour. Yes, your pool is no longer just for cannonballs, awkward barbecues, and tanning sessions that you regret. Although not typically, I've read about how some people have made passive income streams of $15,000 per month this way. I mean, gosh, did Marco Polo just get turned into a side hustle or what? That is Swimply. Then there is storeatmyhouse.com. Do you have an empty closet or an attic? You can turn that into a treasure vault for stranger stuff, and you can get paid while their clutter hides in your home instead of their home. So think of it as maybe some pretty passive income, only dustier. And who even lives there in your attic right now anyway? A bunch of raccoons? They're not paying your rent. Again, that is called Store at My House. Sniff Spot. It turns your backyard into a private dog park. Yeah, local pet owners can book your yard by the hour to let their pups run and sniff and play. You provide the grass, they bring the zoomies, and you pocket the cash. That is Sniff Spot. Pure Storage, that one is a .co. When people need storage, you swoop in like a friendly capitalist neighbor with your extra space. So you rent out your garage or a shed or, say, even a corner of your basement, and you watch empty become income. You are basically running a mini self-storage empire without the neon sign. I mean, sheesh, you are kind of like Jeff Bezos with cobwebs here. Okay, again, that is purestorage.co. Then there's PureSpace. Now, I've used this one before personally, and so has someone else here on staff on GRE. She actually told me about it. What I did is I paid for a few hours as a renter, not the landlord on PureSpace. In fact, I rented this space this past summer to give an in-person real estate presentation where I covered real estate pays 5 ways and the inflation triple crown and all of that. With PureSpace, you rent out your space for events. Okay, so your home or your backyard or loft or some funky warehouse. You rent that out by the hour. And those events could be film shoots or workshops or parties or other events. That's what PureSpace is for. I mean, that could be a cool backdrop for an influencer or a film crew that has a pretty big budget. Renters come to you with alacrity. They will come to you because they can often save 50% or more versus using more traditional avenues there. In fact, even Public Storage, like that's the company name, Public Storage, they're the nation's largest self-storage space operator. They even use Neighbor.com to help lease out their leftover inventory. And so do some REITs that have extra space at their office or retail or apartment properties. They use Neighbor.com as well. All right, so that's my roundup of more peer-to-peer leasing platforms, a few more of them than I told you about earlier this year. And the types of listings, you can get creative. People are getting creative. They are monetizing everything from empty barns to vacant strip mall storefronts to church parking lots. I mean, consider how often church parking lots are empty. They're empty almost every day except Sunday. So get creative and think about space that's not being used. One thing to look out for, though, is that your HOA might try to crush your entrepreneurial spirit here. So keep that in mind. Just look around. Do you own any underutilized space or asset that you can rent out? Well, chances are there's already a peer-to-peer rental platform for it. And when you visit any of these platforms that I told you about, I mean, you're probably already going to see people offering space in your neighborhood. You'll be surprised. And this is not some unproven fad. Turo really took off about 10 years ago when they realized that most Americans' cars just sit idle more than 95% of their time in their driveway or in their garage, well, at that point, everyday people started to lease out their cars on Turo. So the bottom line here is that if you own most any real estate, then you've got options and you can often make the rules. Peer-to-peer leasing platforms add new income streams to your life. And if you read my Don't Quit Your Daydream letter, you'll remember that I wrote about those resources and gave you their links and everything. See, that's a type of material that I put in the letter sometimes. And again, you can get it at greletter.com. It shows you how to build wealth, much like I've been talking about on the show today. This is vital because the conventional consumer finance world, they just don't tell you about things like this. For example, did you ever wonder why economists aren't rich? Like maybe you would think that they would be. Well, it's because schools and universities, they don't really teach you how to make money. So someone can have an advanced degree, a master's, or even a doctorate. That degree will be in finance or in economics, but they're still broke or they're still trapped by their job because the only way they know how to make money is by having a job. There's nothing wrong with having a job, but that's the only thing they know. They never learn how to earn and multiply money like with what I've been discussing today. Economists make between $70K and $180K per year in America today. School taught both us and them the theory of money, how it's counted, how it's tracked, and how it flows through the system, but it really didn't teach them how to build a little diverter device on that flow to earn it or create it or leverage it to build freedom for themselves. And that is why this show is here. That's not a knock on economists. Economists are brilliant people, and some of the best known ones are guests on the show here with us at times. We don't just want to live in a world of models and charts, though. When you build real-world wealth with mortgages and markets and moves that don't always fit inside a formula, and certainly not a conventional one that you grew up with. So when you hear the experts talk about where the economy's heading, sure, listen to them. I listen to them, but be sure to apply that to your own balance sheet because you don't build wealth in theory, you build it in real life. Then how do you get a good deal? Build a relationship with a GRE investment coach like Naresh here. You can do that on just one 30-minute call with him. And then when the deal that you want becomes available, he'll let you know. By the time you find something on the internet, it's going to be too late because that means a lot of people have already passed on that deal if it's already out there publicly. Like I said earlier, if you want to learn and do things the same way that everyone else does, then you are squarely in the wrong place. I really mean it. And why would that be? In fact, what does everyone else have? Not enough money at the end of the month? A budget where they constantly have to make sacrifices to meet it because they think that is the way, and they live below their means instead of grow their means. The underlying philosophy here at GRE is don't live below your means, grow your means. In fact, we have a t-shirt with Grow Your Means on it and our logo on it in our merch shop. That's why GRE has a tree in the logo, Grow Your Means. Instead of shrinking your lifestyle to fit your income, it's about expanding your income to fit your ambitions. So don't cut your dreams to match your paycheck. Grow your paycheck to match your dreams. This really reflects the abundance mindset behind Get Rich Education, that wealth isn't built by pinching pennies, but by creating more cash flow and assets and income streams. In practical terms, like with what I talked about growing my own portfolio back at the beginning of today's show, this means buying cash flowing real estate. That's growing your means. Leveraging good debt. That's growing your means. Using inflation to advantage. That's growing your means. Investing in yourself or in new ventures. That's growing your means. It's the mindset opposite of budget harder It is earn smarter. At its core, grow your means. What that means is expand your capabilities, not just your comfort zone. Use creativity and leverage to multiply your results. View financial growth as a positive, proactive act, not a greedy one, because you're going to serve others with good housing and maintain it. This all encourages abundance over austerity, and it's the same idea behind the tagline, financially free beats debt free. Thanksgiving is coming up this week, and I'll tell you something. Luckily, American ingenuity improved since the Pilgrims left England, traveled to a totally new continent, and called it New England. Fortunately, we have become more innovative since then. You're about to have more topics for conversation with family at the holidays. And note that Gen Z, ages 13 to 28, they're more likely to talk money today than they did previously. They are kind of the share everything on social generation. Tell relatives about your real estate investing, or at least some of the ideas you have. Tell them perhaps something that they would be surprised to hear that you learned on this show, like mortgage rates are in fact historically low today, actually, or something like that. And at Thanksgiving or Christmas, please tell a friend about the show. GRE is the work of my life, and that would mean the world to me. If you like listening every week, tell a friend about the show now. Use the share button on your podcatcher. If this show helps you see money or real estate differently, on Apple Podcasts, touch the 3 dots and then the share button. On Spotify, I think you can just hit the share icon, the little rectangle with the arrow, and post it to your social feed or social story. That's how more people learn how to build real wealth like we do here at GRE. And even better, don't hoard the good stuff. If you learn something here, engage in the nicest kind of wealth redistribution. Tap the share button right now and text this episode to one friend who'd appreciate it. Until next week, I'm your host, Keith Weinhold. Have a happy Thanksgiving, and don't quit your daydream.
Nothing on this show should be considered specific, personal, or professional advice. Please consult an appropriate tax, legal, real estate, financial, or business professional for individualized advice. Opinions of guests are their own. Information is not guaranteed. All investment strategies have the potential for profit or loss. The host is operating on behalf of Get Rich Education, LLC exclusively.
The preceding program was brought to you by your home for wealth building, GetRichEducation.com.